What's up, YouTube? Static in the Attic. I'm learning that we do have records of more than just the Maunder and the Dalton minimum, which I've heard of for a long time in my life. I've known about those periods and that the Earth does go through cycles. Evidently, we do have some more records, though, and it really doesn't look good anytime any of these cycles go around. Where I started the channel at was the 1812 era, and that's when we saw the New Madrid quake that lasted for almost a year. Tecumseh's Comet, the same year that the mission in San Juan Capistrano got taken out, the Caracas earthquake, all kinds of stuff that we know about happening in the Americas during that time frame. The Maunder minimum, I haven't said much about it on here yet, but in this video we'll start covering some of what happened. We've got the Great Comet of 1680 that happened. The Great Fire of London was 1666. The Salem witch trials were right around in that same time frame. And then back during the Wolf minimum, if according to the mainstream dating here, 1333 to 1347 was when everything was cracking off over in China. And you'll see in a minute that we do have reports of earthquakes and flames falling from the sky, basically, in Europe, but they have the dates a little bit off. And so I want to point out here real quick that according to Schroeder, the Sporer minimum was, I believe he is saying that it was 1460 to 1550, and Mayahara is saying it was 1455 to 1510, and then over in China, they're saying it's from 1400 to 1510. So this just goes to show you that we don't have an accurate history going back 500 years, and that alone just blows my mind. It definitely, though, there is something to each one of these solar cycles. It seems like the years are getting off, but I'm not surprised at all. We've covered Gallagherian chronology and all that, but let's go with the official numbers. And just for a time frame reference here, we're talking this is the time of Marco Polo and his supposed trip to China, where he never heard of the Great Wall of China. This was towards the end of the Crusades. And let's have Mr. Ziegler's here account of, I don't believe this is his firsthand account. I believe this was him copying an older text. But he writes, it must have been at some time during 1346 that the word first reached Europe of strange and tragic happenings far away in the east. Even in this age of easy travel and rapid spread of news, calamities in China tended to be accepted in the Occident with polite but detached regret reserved for something infinitely remote. Here he's writing like it was actually fairly common to hear news of the Far East, and that travel really wasn't a big deal. This is the same time period of Marco Polo, is what we're being told, though, where he was basically the first Westerner to go into China, right? Also, with this dating, 1346 would have been, 13 years after the beginning of the calamities over in China. But once again, the Western time frame is way off from the Eastern time frame on things. So I'm pointing this out because it's very possible that all of these were happening at the same time, instead of the way this is going to read out, to where it all happened in China for 15 years and then it happened in Europe for a few years. It just to me makes a lot of sense that this stuff all kind of happened at the same time. But if you're going through China's history from ruler to ruler to ruler, the way that they were keeping time over there, and whatever got changed in their history, and then you're going through European history from king to king to king, going backwards through time, and however many extra kings got thrown in. I'm referring to uh, 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 Anatoly Fomenko's work here, because he is the mathematician that points out that all of these stories, they did like a 26-point bulletin on them, and according to those 26 identifying characters, you keep getting the same story repeated over and over, just the names have changed. So for some reason in our official history, it seems like they've retold the same story over and over and added years in for whatever reason. Anyway, to me, it is a very real possibility that this all happened at the same time, instead of just in the East for 15 years, and then, as you'll see in a minute, 26 years over in Europe. It really seems like the historians would have put all that together into the same time frame, but I guess they're sticking with their story of different time frames. Um, so we covered how there were comets during this period, and some of them even seem to be putting out a black smoke, which is definitely weird. And certainly things seem to have gone badly wrong. An imposing series of disasters studded the history of the previous years. In 1333, parching drought with consequential famine had ravaged the plains watered by the rivers Kang and Hua. Then had come floods in which 400,000 were said to have perished, at the result of which, presumably, Mount Chinshu fell in, causing great chaos in the earth. In my video on this time frame over in China, there were I think 3 different accounts of mountains falling in, and one of them they said that 100-league lake in circumference had formed. That's 350 miles. That is a big lake. And like I was saying, even if this took a month or two or a year for that to take place, that would still be pretty extraordinary. In the east, hard by greater India in certain province, horrors of unheard tempests overwhelmed the whole province for the span of 3 days. On the first day there was rain of frogs, serpents, lizards, and scorpions, and many venomous beasts of the sort. On the second, thunder was heard, and lightning, and sheets of fire fell from the earth, mingled with hailstones of marvelous size. They know what lightning is. They know what thunder is. What are they trying to describe here as sheets of fire fell upon the earth? I mean, is this a full-on electrical discharge, going back to the electric universe theory? I really don't know. But I don't think they would describe it that way if it was just heavy lightning. But who knows? On the third day there fell from heaven a stinking smoke which slew all that were left of men and beasts, and burning up all the cities and towns in those parts. I mean, seriously, what is going on here? I'll tell you my personal take on things, and one of the most important things to take away from all this is, if you see a comet and you smell something funny, get inside, get away from that smell, get you a gas mask, get a respirator, get something, because this is evidently the cause of all the plagues. And I don't know who it was, maybe it was a Kurt Vonnegut book or something, but I do remember reading some fiction book of the ice melting in Antarctica and releasing this bacteria that was, millions of years old or whatever. Now, this the foul smell that they're talking about could be from the earthquakes opening up the ground and sulfurous odors coming up, or could it possibly be from the comet itself bringing something that's falling from the sky on us? By these tempests, the whole province was infected, and it conjectured that through the foul blast of wind that came from the south, the whole seashore and surrounding lands were infected and are waxing more and more poisonous by the day. Another chronicler, the Dominican friar Bartolomeo, reports massive rains of worms and serpents in parts of China, which devoured large numbers of people. Also, in those parts, fire rained from heaven in the form of snow, ash possibly, which burnt mountains, the land, and men, and from this fire rose a pestilent smoke that killed all who smelt it within 12 hours, as well as those who only saw the poison of that pestilential smoke. I seriously just don't. I have a fairly decent understanding of scientific processes, of how germs work, how the earth works. It could be possible that, whether due to a volcanic eruption or an earthquake opening up the ground, that it releases something like natural gas or something like that that is heavier than air, that would stick down to the ground and possibly suffocate people. That's one theory out there. Another theory is that it is a bacterial type, viral type infection that, I mean, they're saying it killed all who smelt it within 12 hours. So, I don't know. Just throwing it out there for you guys. Now, like I said, everything happened over in China, supposedly from 1333 up until 1347, when the fury of the elements subsided in China. And then the signs of terrestrial commotions commenced in Europe in the year 1348. Like I said, it just seems to me like they've got their timelines off here, because why would it happen for 15 years over in China and then start over in Europe? Anyway, on the island of Cyprus, the plague from the east had already broken out when an earthquake shook the foundations of the island and was accompanied by so frightful a hurricane that the inhabitants, who had slain their Mahometan slaves in order that they might not themselves be subjugated by them, fled in dismay in all directions. The sea overflowed, the ships were dashed to pieces on the rocks, and few outlived the terrific event, whereby this fertile and blooming island was converted into a desert. Before the earthquake, a pestiferous wind spread so poisonous an odor that many, being overpowered by it, fell down suddenly and expired in dreadful agonies. So, I mean, this is just creeping death here. It just, I guess, once, if you smelt it, you dealt it. That's it for you. But it's incredibly interesting that they're describing the island of Cyprus as a fertile and blooming island, to where, from what I know of Cyprus, it's much more like Southern California now. It's a very arid and sandy place. But hey, Southern California now is turning into a blooming. Oh God, I went for a walk where I normally mountain bike a couple weeks ago. It was so overgrown that I couldn't mountain bike the trail, and all of the flowers and all of everything that is usually just dead tumbleweed type material was well overhead. So the desert's turning into an oasis here. This phenomenon is one of the rarest that has ever been observed, for nothing is more consistent than the composition of air, and in no respect has nature been more careful in the preservation of organic life. I think I covered this in part one and two. I was wanting to get down to here. Pursuing the course of the grand revolutions further, we find notice of an unexampled earthquake which on the 25th January 1348 shook Greece, Italy, and the neighboring country. Naples, Rome, Pisa, Bologna, Padua, Venice, and many other cities suffered considerably. Whole villages were swallowed up. Castles, houses, and churches were overthrown, and hundreds of people were buried beneath their ruins. In Carinthia, 30 villages, together with all the churches, were demolished. More than 1,000 corpses were drawn out of the rubbish. The city of Vlach was so completely destroyed that very few of its inhabitants were saved, and when the earth ceased to tremble, it was found that mountains had been moved from their positions. It's just, I don't know, it's insanity. These destructive quakes extend as far north as the neighborhood of Basel and recurred until the year 1360. So they are saying from 1348 until 1360, that's a 12-year period, but in no way did it happen from 1333 to 1347 in that 13-year period. So I guess I'm just gonna have to leave it at that. It seems a lot to me like historians would say, well, hey, could we possibly have the dating wrong on this, and this might have all happened at the same time? I don't know. And disease, the invariable consequence of famine. So, we've already covered how massive flooding followed by extreme drought. Different areas would have flooding while another area would be in drought, just like what we're seeing today. And I noticed they actually showed the jet stream for the first time that I've seen it in a long time. And the jet stream is just going absolutely crazy. We used to see it all of the time. So this is one of the mud flooded castles in Carinthia that they're talking about, the villages there. Also, supposedly during these earthquakes in the 1300s, that's when the Roman Colosseum caved in, which just makes me think, well, what were they doing with the Colosseum for that 1300? Well, I guess Rome fell in 500 AD, but so 800 years of, wow, there's a big Colosseum there that, you know, we're not going to do anything with. Let's not take the stones and build anything new and repurpose it. It's just set there for till modern day, 1300 years. Lost my train of thought there. Anyway, these are some of the ruins in Carinthia. And I found this photo interesting because you can see that they did plaster the walls here. So all of these old medieval castles that we see all the stones and everything. I don't think we're seeing what they actually looked like by any means back in the day, because just like I've showed the Aztec architecture here, they would use rough stone. They would take their time and cut very intricate blocks for the doorways, and then they'd just plaster over the rough stone, and there you have it. So these could have been very beautifully painted castles, and this is some pretty fancy stonework here. The three knights here definitely remind me of the Rothschilds' coat of arms. And then Albac, Carinthia has the ruins of this old castle that they say went down in the late 17th century, which could possibly be right in line with the Great Comet of 1680. Not sure about that, but we do have a few more things on that. This website here shows that in 1300 AD, a terrible comet appeared in the sky, and in this year on St. Andrew's Day, an earthquake shook the ground so that many buildings collapsed. In 1401 AD, a big comet with a tail appeared in the sky in Germany that was followed by a great, terrible plague in Swabia. I'm sure everybody has heard of New Swabia down in Antarctica, but this is talking about Germany, the original Swabia. Comets are not a good sign, and I've always heard it in folklore, and it's in movies and everything, and now I'm starting to get the picture of why. Now, once again, according to these accounts over here, everything that happened in Europe was from, what did I say, 1348 up to 1360, but then we had the St. Mary Magdalene's flood in 1342, which actually falls right in line with all of the craziness that was going on in China. It's just unbelievable that we don't have a consistent timeline of our history, even going back 500 years. And I'm wondering how far consistently we actually do, because when I started this channel, I was kind of thinking that the long 18th century, the 1700s, I was thinking that they just made that up and threw it in to throw off the timelines because of all the similarities that I was finding in the late 1600s and the early 1800s. So here in London, and I mean right in London, I don't know London very well. There were a couple of these Spitalfields markets, but they said it was in East London, and this does say the East End, so I think I've got the right one. But I wanted everybody to understand that we are talking about right in the center of the city. So back in the day, I'm sure that London was smaller. Actually, I have seen maps of it. I think St. James Park was about the far west side, and it just kind of snaked around the city. But check out what they found right here. When archaeologists discovered thousands of medieval skeletons in a mass burial pit in East London in the 1990s, they assumed they were 14th century victims of the Black Death or the Great Famine of 1315 to 1317. Now they have been astonished by a more explosive explanation, a cataclysmic volcano that had erupted a century earlier, thousands of miles away in the tropics, and wrought havoc on medieval Britons. They're talking about 10 to 15,000 skeletons. I mean, this is a very mass grave, and they don't know when they died. They don't know how they died. And this is right in the center of London. I mean, this was probably the edge of town, but I mean, it sounds like they dug a pit right on the edge of town and just started throwing everybody in there. But it's just amazing that we are talking about 15,000 people and they don't know when they died. So they go into radiocarbon dating, and I've already showed how these solar minimum cycles change the amount of carbon-14 that is in the atmosphere. So the radiocarbon dating is completely out in my book. But they say it shows for the first time that mass fatalities in the 13th century were caused by one of the largest volcanic eruptions in the past 10,000 years. Surprisingly, perhaps, the volcano's exact location is yet to be established. Mexico, Ecuador, and Indonesia are the most likely areas, according to volcanologists who found evidence in ice cores from the northern hemisphere and Antarctic, and within a thick layer of ash from Lake Malawi sediment. So they're not sure what volcano, they just think it was a volcano. And they do list that quite a few people had rickets, and what were the other diseases that were indicative of, I think maybe scurvy, that was indicative of a famine. Yeah, scurvy and rickets. And yeah, sorry, I'm kind of tired, guys, but I thought I'd get a video out since I've been kind of quiet lately. Volcanoes have a very long reach because they can impact climate. Yes, it can. They did mention in there the 2010 Iceland volcano, and I don't know if you guys remember this, but it was disrupting a bunch of flights and everything, and it was blowing the ash directly towards England. And I know that they shut down their flights for quite a while, but I found this article from the 2010 era when they were heavily pushing all of the global warming. And at this time frame, this is when they came out and told us that Glacier National Park will not have any glaciers by 2020, which they just had to go out and take all of the signs down. By the way, I think it snowed 2 feet in Colorado last night. Um, Things aren't getting warmer at all. And here in Southern California, uh, at least twice in the last 2 weeks, I've gone to work with a flannel on, and that is just not Southern California weather. I went and rode my bike up Ortega a couple of weeks ago. I had to put on a jacket and a beanie. It was cold up there, and this is normally where I do my training hikes for higher elevations, and by this time of year it's usually 100 plus degrees by 3 in the afternoon, and that was about the time that I went for my bike ride. It's, the weather is just so far off from normal here, and I'm afraid that we're going to have another cold snap, just a little warming trend here for a little while, and then snap right back into next winter, because next winter is officially the start of the solar minimum. And I guess the jury's still out on whether or not it's going to be a grand solar minimum. Let's hope not. So Mount Etna would have been an eruption roughly around the time frame that these guys were talking about this. They say in 1258, a monk reported the north wind prevailed for several months. Scarcely a small rare flower or shooting germ appeared, whence the hope of harvest was uncertain. Innumerable multitudes of poor people died, and their bodies were found lying all about, swollen from want. So 1258, and they say that Mount Etna was in 1254. I don't know if those could possibly be at the same time, but then also they're saying that the most destructive eruption since 122 BC was in 1669, and this was right in the time frame that I was talking about in the Maunder minimum, when we had all kinds of crazy stuff like the Great Fire of London, which was supposedly started by a baker on Puddin Street. Not even making that up. But we have the Great Comet of 1680, and we have a big earthquake in Malaga in 1680. And like I said earlier, this was roughly the time frame of the Salem witch trial, so I don't know what was going on over here in America at that time frame, but evidently they decided that they would just start burning a bunch of witches. And like I said, this would definitely, with this stuff going on, people would understandably be saying that, we made God mad. This is the wrath of God. And, you know, that's why all this is happening. Very, very understandable. But, a lot of people on this channel have said, get right with Jesus. He's coming back. And for me, I would mark that up under hope for the best. Like I've said the whole time, hope for the best. Prepare for the worst and hope for the best. Just because the weather's getting a little weird doesn't, to me, mean that this is for sure the time of Jesus coming back. So I am definitely preparing myself for this just being another period of bad weather, because it seems like just about clockwork. Every couple hundred years, sun goes through its little cycle, it hits the reset button and has to charge its batteries again, and things get kind of hairy out there. But I do think that it's well into each of these cycles when things start getting really crazy out there. So if I'm correct on that, then, we've got, 30 years or so before things actually get really bad. But, we have definitely seen an uptick in volcanoes are going off everywhere around the world right now. Earthquakes everywhere around the world. We had a swarm of 1,000 of them over in the Inland Empire over the last 3 weeks. Then the 5.8 up in Eureka. Too many to keep up with in South America. There was a magnitude 5.7 something in Australia that, from the witness accounts that I heard about it, they seemed absolutely shocked that there was an earthquake there at all. And they said that it was pretty hard hitting. It sounded to me like stronger than a 5 earthquake from as surprised as the witnesses seemed. But yeah, so the foul odors coming from the sky and the comets, just something that's definitely on my radar. If I start seeing some big funky comets in the sky, I might be thinking about getting me a dust mask at the very least, if I've got one around, or taking a little shelter and getting out of the air. Because like I said, even on the book that I read out of South America, down there they all hid from the fog as it rolled in, and they described it as a sulfurous, foul-smelling fog that would make people sick if they were out in it. And it was definitely interesting here that they said that careful people remained in the dwellings in the morning, fumigated their rooms with pleasantly smelling and precious things, and they ate early before the harmful air could enter their empty bodies. So it just makes me kind of think of, for what they say to do for radiation poisoning is you take a bunch of iodine and it basically fills up your thyroid gland. I think it's your thyroid gland, but it fills your gland up so that the radioactive particles can't actually enter there and make you sick. But I'm actually going to have to do a video on the whole radioactive thing, because there's just some pretty interesting stuff out there. But hey, if you see comets and earthquakes and you start smelling something funny, you might want to get out of there. Just saying. Anyway, I hope this wasn't too much of a ramble. Trying to get back into the swing of things here. So I love you guys. Take care of yourselves out there. We're all one. Static out.